I mean, you know.
Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming. We appreciate that you're all here. This is the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education special meeting tonight, October 7th, 2013. Christine, can we please have a roll call to get started?
Mark Berry.
Present.
John Morosen.
Present.
Christine Letchinger, present. Leanne Charlo.
Present.
Julie Gottschall.
Present.
Richard Haig.
Present.
Susan Wright.
Present.
So we are all present. We have a quorum and we call to order. I'm going to open up by asking for any public comment. We welcome comments from staffs, parents, and constituents. The board president will determine the format and ground rules for comments in the best interest of the audience and the agenda. If anybody would like to address the board, please come to the podium and state your name and where you're from. Also know that we will have the opportunity to address the board at the end of the meeting if anything piques your interest and you want to make comment on it later on. Anybody? Okay. Nobody, so we're going to move forward right to our only action item tonight, which is personnel recommendations. And, gotta pull up my form sheet. We have recommendations for,
This is the amended one.
oh, the amendment, okay. I'd like a motion to approve the personnel recommendations as approved in your packet for two people, Neil Ireland, at the elementary school for a special ed aide, and for David Weber at the middle school, also as a special ed aide. May I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Discussions or questions or comments by anybody?
I think it's no, by the way.
Yeah. It is. No.
No, oh, I'm sorry, I said Neil, I apologize. No.
It's okay, you're fine.
No? No questions, comments? May I have a roll call vote, please?
John Morosen.
Yes.
Chris Letchinger, yes. Leanne Charlo.
Yes.
Julie Gottschall.
Yes.
Richard Haig.
Yes.
Susan Ryder.
Yes.
Mark Barry? Yes.
Mark Berry. Sorry.
Motion's approved. Okay, that's it for action. I'm going to go right into our reports, and we're going to have a little report by me on the frontispiece. And I'm going to try to not act like I'm reading, but I'm going to be reading a little bit. A little background first. The eSchool frontispiece has been on our list of future agenda items for a number of months, and it's time we got to it. We decided to raise this issue as a report tonight, and notice I'm saying report and not a discussion, for two reasons. First, our agenda is really packed. We just have 100 things to cover, and we can't dedicate that much time to it, but we need to touch on it. Second, we wanted to bring up everybody to kind of a baseline on this, get to the basics and the history so that we can better address this in the future. One of the interesting things that I learned while digging into this whole issue, and I'll get into it more, is that this issue is a sensitive one in the community. It's accompanied by a great deal of sentiment, and that we need to be sensitive to these concerns and go slow as we move forward addressing the frontispiece. It's important that we both honor the history of this significant architectural piece as well as be prudent fiscal managers. So a little history. For anybody who's not sure exactly what we're talking about, the frontispiece was the arched entryway to the East School, pictured in the photographs that accompanied your board packet. This arch was added during a 1923 addition to East School. Interestingly, it's not original to the building, which dates all the way back to 1895. Thanks to Janet Nelson, by the way, for her giving me an education on all this. The frontispiece and what's called the Marguerite Kretzberg mural, which also used to be in the East School, are all that remains of this historic building that did receive a landmark designation a few years ago. It was interesting to learn the extent to which East School really has significant sentimental value in the community, across a broad section of this community. And recognizing this sentiment, and at significant expense, District 65 took great pains to salvage, preserve, and store this frontispiece during building demolition in 2011. This piece is currently stored on 10 very heavy pallets spanning across 250 square feet at a secure storage facility at about a cost of $300 a month. So far, we spent about $9,600 storing this. The bottom line here is it's these ongoing storage expenses which have prompted the inclusion of the frontispiece on our agenda tonight. However, my inquiries to the community have made it clear that there are many other issues that need to be addressed as well. Namely, there's no specific plan identifying District 65's and the community's role in determining how the frontispiece will be reused. Similarly, while a variety of ideas have been tossed about, there are no specific plans for its ultimate reuse. It is these latter two issues, not the storage cost, which fuels the concern and sentiment in the community that I referred to above earlier. So recognizing this history and knowing that many individuals worked really hard on what was known as the East School Task Force to ensure that the desires of the community were heard, I reached out to as many past and present board and community members who were involved with this as I could. The idea was to get as complete a picture as possible from a variety of perspectives of what was done and what was expected of District 65 in the future, as well as to get an idea of what perceptions or misperceptions may be held in the community. It's my opinion that our understanding of these perceptions and expectations can help us better appreciate the sentiment attached to this issue. All totaled, I had email correspondence or phone or face-to-face conversations with 17 different people in the past 2 weeks over this. Based on all these conversations, I summarized my findings as follows. First of all, I was relieved to learn that across my conversations, expectations for the future of the frontispiece were more aligned than I expected. I was initially concerned that there would be more misperceptions than there actually were in the community. After having gone through this, it is apparent to me that the district and the community are more on the same page than either had realized before. I find that it was reassuring to those who I spoke with to learn that I was reaching out to the community in advance of our meeting with the express purpose of listening to their concerns of those who might have an interest in the future of this piece. Overall, I found that there was recognition of the fact that District 65 followed through on its commitment to salvage, preserve, and store this frontispiece. I also learned that no specific commitment was made by the district or any other group as to exactly where or how to reuse this frontispiece in the future. Similarly, no commitment was made by the district or any other community group about who was going to pay for future reuse of this frontispiece. At one point after demolition, the Villette Museum had been asked to take ownership, but they had to decline because of the cost. They currently have possession of the Marguerite Kretzberg mural that I referred to earlier, but also due to lack of funds, they're unable to act on that either. I found that there's general agreement that District 65 is not in the historical preservation business. But as part of the community, we have an interest in and an obligation to the future of this piece. Likewise, there's general agreement that given its historical significance, this is a community issue, not just a school district issue. In fact, there appears to be broad expectations for community involvement in determining the future of the frontispiece, and that District 65 should not go it alone. It's my belief that this is the root of most of the concerns in the community on this issue, that they are concerned that the district might make decisions regarding the frontispiece without community input. An idea I heard replayed several times was that this is an issue that may be well suited to being championed by what we call the Tri-Board Committee, which is a committee comprised of 2 board members and their administrator from each of the village, the park district, and the school district. The part of my conversations that generated the most varied feedback, so inconsistent feedback, had to do with the spectrum of all the possible ideas for possible use of this frontispiece in the future, and it's a broad spectrum. In my conversations, I learned of discussions that came out of the East School Task Force focused mostly on reusing this at the East School site. I learned of comments made by former superintendents at the Historic Preservation Commission meetings indicating reuse at the former East School grounds. I learned of all the challenges associated with trying to reuse the frontis in residential areas due to zoning requirements and all the related setbacks. I learned about the idea of reusing the frontis as a future entrance to the middle school or maybe even to a new middle school. I learned about the idea of using the frontis to create a fine arts or performing arts entrance to the new wing at the middle school. I learned about the idea of building a park with outdoor seating at the East School site or somewhere else in the community using the frontis as a gateway. There was an idea of building an outdoor amphitheater consistent with a historical structure that was located on the same location in the past and incorporating the frontis as an entry. I learned about the idea of turning over the frontis, the former East School site, to the village or to the park district for a park. I also was told about the idea of putting the mural and the frontispiece in or on the elementary school. lots of ideas that we need to help coordinate and see that these all get feted out. So going forward, in light of the consistent feedback that I received that this is a community issue, not just a school district issue, along with the desires of many of the community to have a say in the future of the frontis, I recommend that the members of our tri-board committee raise this issue with the village and the park district at their next meeting. It seems to me that this is the perfect venue for organizing community input and developing a long-term plan for the future of this frontis. In addition, I'm going to encourage Jean to look into finding an alternative storage location at no or greatly reduced cost to the district so that this historic piece can be safely preserved until a plan has been developed for its future. In fact, one of the outcomes of all of these conversations that I had is that we are actually already looking into donated storage space for this piece. Finally, I would recommend that we revisit this topic for a more thorough discussion in the future, only after we've had time to investigate storage options and to raise the topic at a tri-board committee meeting to gauge interest. So we're trying to keep this at a report, but if anybody has any quick questions or clarification, I'd be glad to address them.
What is the size of the frontis?
It is, it was the doorway, the archway over the entryway to the former school. It's probably 10 feet high and 8 feet across, something like that.
Here.
This whole piece here, or need concrete work. And right now it resides on 10 pallets, covers about 250 square
Yeah, I
feet.
saw that.
Each pallet is heavy, and it's not something you can easily move about. But it is concrete, it's pretty durable, it doesn't require temperature regulated storage. It can be, even could be outside under a tarp if it had to be.
Did you volunteer to put that in your yard? Is that what I heard?
I think that's what I heard him say.
So I would
You might want to clear that with your wife.
So
first.
administration's going to find a better way to store this, and I would recommend that Rich and Christine at that next meeting, you guys bring that up, because there was some interest from the village as to moving this thing forward and taking ownership as a community, not just, not just the school.
Well, thank you, sir.
So that's something I'll make sure I put on our next tri-board meeting
Yes.
Yes.
for you to share. And we may want to bring the pictures and the memo when we go to that also.
Okay, so now we're going to go right into our discussion items. Item 5, and we're going to lead off with an educational adequacy report from our architect, BLDD, and Tim McGrath. Thank you, Tim.
Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to see the board again, and Dr. Sophie and the guests. What I wanted to do tonight was a couple things. Let me jump in here. This was an agenda I put together. I'll try to go through it fairly quickly, but I did want to be able to give you the lay person's overview or narrative to the booklet that you had received. I could go through it pretty quickly, but I just wanted one more opportunity to make sure that it's making sense to you. So I was going to do that, talk about the charge that we had received from the district. Again, quickly go through the facilities assessment, see if you had any other questions about that. And then Barb Meek, would you stand up? Barb Meek is a principal with BLDD Architects. She performs our educational adequacy assessments across our corporation. Prior to becoming an architect, Barb was a math teacher. And so Barb will be speaking in a little bit. Also with me tonight is Bob Sill. Bob is with our engineering firm CS2. He was involved in the elementary school as well as the middle school project. And then next to Bob is Jeff Hoffman, an architect in our office in Chicago that was instrumental to performing the facilities assessment across the board. So with that, the charge that we received from the district was twofold. It was to support the district's development of a strategic capital facilities master plan by performing a detailed physical conditions assessment for the elementary and middle school facilities. Due to the nature that the elementary school, brand new 21st century building, there wasn't a lot there to discover, thank God. And that's in the report, but also we did talk a lot about the middle school. And then lastly, we performed an educational adequacy assessment evaluating the middle school only in terms of how well that school stacks up against CEFPI's 21st century planning standards for a new school. So very quickly, this is the flow chart of the process by which we did the work. Obviously, our charge here, and it's broken into two pieces. This is the physical conditions assessment, educational adequacy assessment. under the physical conditions assessment, we look at two different distinct pieces of data. The first one is what we call building renewal model, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then the other is also looking at health, life, safety, physical assessment. It's the assessment that we do on a 10-year health, life, safety survey basis. And then coming out of those two assessments, we develop findings. And the findings is what is in the report that was given to you last month. On the educational adequacy side, similar thing, we use the CEFP model that he talked about. And the primary question that gets posed by that CEFP model is how well does this facility function as a 21st century learning environment? And it's a score sheet, it's 110 questions or so that get graded. And Barb will talk more about that as well. And there are some findings that come out of that. That's the score sheet. And this, we've stopped here at this bar right here, if you will, the bar and the findings. We've not made any recommendations because this is a work in progress. We're giving it back to you so that you can weave it into your strategic facilities planning effort to begin to start to create priorities. And then coming out of that, obviously, will be woven into an integrated strategic capital plan. Just very quickly, a look at the middle school. It comprised of 4 editions. The 1954 edition, 1960 classroom edition, the 68 gym edition, and then obviously the 2009 referendum project that was done. So very quickly, we talked about 2 different components of our physical conditions assessment. There is what's called a building component analysis, and I'll go through that in a second. The underlying approach here is that every building is comprised of components and they all have certain lifespans. And at the end of that lifespan, they need to be replaced. Case in point, foundations and structure. You can probably get 100 years out of that foundation and structure. Roofing, whole different issue. 25 to 30 years on a roof, 30 years maybe on windows. Interior finishes tend to be 20 years before they get worn and dated. So these are all the components that we go through and analyze and look at. And when we do this walkthrough, we literally treat it as if we're doing a punch list on a project, where we're literally walking and looking at every square inch of the building. It's not just this architectural issue, but as obviously Bob Sill and CS2, the engineers, looked at all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing in the middle school as well. And so more of that to report here. The grading, everything that we come up with, and again, this is in your report, has been graded according to ISBE's 10-year health and safety survey grading. It's 4 priorities, A, B, and C, and then the last priority is a priority D. A, B, C are the standard health, life, safety gradings for issues. Urgent, required, recommended, and then priority D are issues that would not show up on a health, life, safety survey, but we found them to be that they're starting to reach the end of their natural life in terms of we're able to project down the road when that item would need to be replaced. Here's just some very quick snapshots of some of the things we looked at. This is a picture of a hole in the roof membrane. That's a tree branch. Apparently came down in a storm, punctured the roof. Needs to be addressed. Obviously not a major issue, but it certainly needs to be addressed. Here's some corner flashing. There's a hole in the corner flashing. Again, it needs to be repaired. Similar here. This is a roof vent that has been snapped off. This vent should be probably another 8 to 10, 12 inches taller. Again, not major issues. The buildings generally, the middle school is specifically what we're focusing on here. It's in good shape. I mean, it's old. It's got old components to it, but it's been handled well. There are things that are coming to the end of their life, but they can be planned for and dealt with. Here's some issues with tuck pointing, parapet walls, what have you. Again, nothing that's surprising to us given the age of the building, but just maintenance issues that need to be dealt with. Some interior finish issues. Here's some interior doors. I don't know how well you can see that. The doors are sort of cracked and splayed and what have you. Again, be replacement. Some ceiling tile issues. This may be also related to some leaky valves above the ceiling, or just tile that's gotten so much humidity in it that it's starting to sag. So all of these conditions have been documented in a report, and so they're easy to find there. Another big item, and this is all the interior casework at the middle school. in our opinion, has long passed its useful life. It really needs to be replaced. You can see sort of the condition, a lot of these doors that don't shut and their laminate's coming off, missing hardware, and then some exterior painting and maintenance issues there. On the infrastructure side, Bob, you want to give me some help here? This is the hot water circulating pump?
Hot water circulating pumps that are
Come on up. They gotta hear you.
we just have some hot water circulating pumps which are beyond their useful life, getting pretty old there. It's kind of hard to tell from the pictures. Next to it is some electrical switchgear, which is probably either original to the building or after the first edition. Same thing there with some pumps and then the panel boards below. A lot of it just is over 50 years old, and at some point you can't really rely on it to work properly as originally designed.
So, and with all that as background, I'll take you to this spreadsheet, and again, this is in the report, but the 3 or 4 columns, I want to make sure that you really understand what you're looking at. The very first column here is called first costs, and you can see this is for a 30-year lifespan. So the first cost, escalated first cost, renewal cost, and escalated renewal cost. The first costs here, those are the items that we discovered that have deficiencies, and those are the pictures I just sort of showed you. Holes in flashing, a punctured roof membrane. There are issues that need attention, and so the value that you see here is the cost of addressing all of those issues that was discovered in today's dollars. The third category, which says renewal costs, the renewal costs are those building components that we're not finding problems with per se, but we know they're getting towards the end of their life, like the pumps Bob just talked about. The pumps are still working, but they're very old. They're going to go at some point in probably not too distant future. So those are things that should be thought about building into a plan, capital plan.
What's the escalated first cost?
The escalated first cost is, the basis here was, again, we took, and this is the way we do all of our facility assessments. It takes this, let me get the thing, takes that first cost number, today's cost, and makes an assumption, and I'm not run this past anybody, but it makes the assumption that if the district wanted to go solve that problem right now today, and go out for bonds, and purchase bonds and the interest rates on the bonds for a 10-year period, that's what that number,
Okay, so if we pay cash.
So that's
those
financing
Exactly.
of the 15 grand,
534.
right?
I'm sorry?
Financing of the 15 grand,
Yes,
okay.
yes,
But for cash, it's 534.
Yes.
correct.
560.
And then the same thing on the renewal cost. The renewal cost is the $877,000, which we're seeing has life expectancy issues that, you know, in the next so many years, have to be addressed and replaced. And the escalated is the same approach there. And what you can also see in the report is every one of these lines here, we see renewal costs. There's a detailed backup. There's detailed backup in the report that identifies what issues, what items are in that number. Okay? And then, again, we did the same thing for the elementary school. Being a brand-new school building, we're not really seeing things out till 2029.
I
Yes,
just
sir.
one other question, I want to make sure I understand. So, first, to take care of all the first cost items and the renewal cost items, which would bring us pretty much up to snuff, would be roughly $1.4 million.
Mm-hmm.
564 plus 877, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Right?
yes.
Okay.
What's your definition of near future?
It depends on each item and the component. So if a roof has a life expectancy of 25 years, we may be looking at a roof and say, well, it's probably got another 5 years left in it. Pumps can be something else, windows can be something else. So it's all based on the lifespan of that building component piece, and that's in the report. So it's really a holistic building model, if you will, that's taken component by component.
And the other columns, O and M costs, and could you define that for me?
Yeah, the O and M costs and energy costs are just what the district is paying.
That's part of our ongoing
yes.
expense budget.
Yes.
So it's not incremental cost, anything to do.
No, this is
Okay.
your ongoing
Okay.
budgets.
I need to apologize in advance, but I missed you saying the definition of renewal cost.
The renewal cost, it goes back to the fact that every building is comprised of various components. Structural system, electrical system, roofs, windows, and each one of those components has, let me back up to a slide real quick for this meeting. Each one of those components has a certain lifespan to it, a natural lifespan. Some of it, a foundation structure can be 100 years, that you get a useful life out of that thing. Others, like roofs, 20, 25 years, mechanical equipment, 25, 30 years. So every component's got a different, potentially different lifespan to it. And so when we went through, the engineers and the architectural team went through and looked at every inch of the building and all the equipment and the systems, we got the data from the district, there's how old that equipment is, when that roof went on, and what have you. And then also with our detailed walkthrough, looking at roofs, like the gym roof, right now the gym roof, I believe, was the only roof that was not replaced under the referendum project. And so that roof already is past its lifespan. It's beyond 25 years right
It's
there.
CapEx, CapEx.
But I went through and added up all the items in priority A through D,
Mhm.
and that comes to 564. Right?
Correct.
So all of these itemized, Mark, all of these itemized items in all of these pages adds up to first cost of 564. If you want details about each of them.
I have a question also.
Sure.
So where you listed details about cost for items, and you say for some of them, for example, recommended in 10 years, is that because you're looking at an item and saying, well, that paint is probably going to peel in 10 years, or you're saying it's peeling now, but it's not something you really need to address until later?
No, we look at a component in terms of what its normal expected lifespan is. And if that wall was painted 10 years ago, I think for interior finishes we did 20 years, was that correct? So if that wall was painted 10 years ago, we would say you should be thinking about upgrading that finish in 10 years, and so that's where that would then fall
Okay.
on the date.
I had seen something about laminate on doors peeling, and that would be in 10 years, so I didn't know if that was doors that were already peeling, or this is something we just anticipate will happen in the future to those doors that aren't already peeling.
No, well, all the doors that you saw in these pictures were under this first cost.
Mhm.
So we're saying those doors should be replaced.
They gotta
now.
go.
Yeah.
So just to make sure we all understand, everything that's recommended in here, everything for the next 10 years will cost $1.441 million.
Right.
I think that, and Tim, I'm just gonna do one clarification with that, which we'll talk about later.
Sure.
But I know one of the things that several board members have brought up as far as safety is that the redoing of the front entrance, that wasn't put in here as something that needed to be done. That was from a previous study, right?
That was a previous study. It looked at a couple different things. Looked at a coral suite. It looked at a new entry. It looked at redoing the administrative area. So no, that's not in here, no.
And the costs that you're projecting for us, these all pertain to your assessment of the physical building, not the educational adequacy?
Correct,
Okay.
correct. This is all on the physical condition of the building and keeping it serviceable. So with that, and we just sort of peppered questions, but if there's more questions, I'd be happy to take more. If not, we can move on to the educational adequacy piece. Mark?
John, you said
Yeah,
1.4
where's the
million? Where
1.441.
where is that number?
You add up the first cost and the escalated cost.
Okay.
Or you can go
So
through.
right
and
at the
add up-
top?
You can add up every itemized item, which I did first.
But escalated cost would be a finance one,
No,
so,
without financing,
So first the
cost and
renewal.
renewal cost, not
whatever those
escalated
two
cost.
columns are, yeah.
renewal cost.
Right.
First
Right.
the renewal is
So
So
1.4.
877 and
Plus
564,
564, right.
yes.
Got it.
Thank you.
And so I think you explained that the O&M costs and energy costs, those columns, sorry to go back here, but those are operating costs, right?
Those are your current costs that you are incurring right now.
Okay, so the 2.4 that you see on the first year zero is both the incremental costs, the first cost and renewal costs, as well as the O&M.
Energy and O&M, yes. And then as you look down that chart of energy and O&M, you'll see that number goes up every year, escalation.
And that's as is, I take it?
Yes.
So any energy efficiency that we got from any of these changes is negligible or not included? in
The
these
only,
numbers?
the only thing energy-wise was we changed out the ballast and the lighting for the classrooms. So, yes, it's
Not measurable
well,
particularly in these
well,
numbers?
it's also, you've been operating the building under that. So the dollars that we have here now are current.
Okay.
Okay. So, as we discussed, Tim and Jeff did the physical needs assessment, and I went through the building to do the educational adequacy, and a little bit of background on that, because it's not necessarily, this is about how the school works as a school. A bank might be a great bank, but it's not, as a building, but it's not going to function as a school. So we had to look at the school, the building, and how does it function in the future of a 21st century environment. So what does that mean? The buildings were built in the days when there was more of a lecture style, educational, the sage on the stage. And now we're looking, and that worked because it was more of a factory model of education. Because as we saw that it developed skilled and unskilled laborers, which is what the employers needed, a lot of people were, this is of 1959, a lot of people were in manufacturing and in the retail trades. And then at more current data, people are being hired more into the service industry. The manufacturing responsibilities are not a part of what we're educating our children for. The curriculum, more of a high school curriculum then and now. Obviously the variety of classes that are being offered has expanded. And then in business education, certainly those types of classes are completely different from then and now. So the building needs to be creating students to work in the workforce that has different needs, because we have a global society that wasn't there in the 50s when the buildings were built. Teachers get asked, what do you need in your room? And they say things like, we need more electrical outlets, we'd like to have places for small group work. Just to be really clear, these were not surveyed from the Lake Bluff teachers, this is just in general. But we want technology access, we need to have places where the teachers can get together and work together. We need to have places where the departments are together, and we just need to have places for the kids to collaborate. But what do they have? The highest rated answer for which instructional method that your space allows you to employ is lecture style. School districts don't necessarily have the facilities that allow for collaboration, small group work, the space for people to get together and reconfigure the space as needed. There are a lot of studies that have shown how a variety of educational environments will enhance the education. Do school facilities affect academic outcomes? The one on the right there, the answer is yes. The results of that were a resounding yes. Indoor air quality has been studied, as well as the access to daylighting. And these things are what creates a 21st century learning environment. Because as you know, learning isn't optional anymore. With No Child Left Behind, learning is mandatory. And an environment needs to meet the needs of every child, engage the students in learning. They can learn anywhere at any time, and support those 4 C's of collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking as a part of the Common Core. So a couple of photographs of student-centered or 21st century environments. This one is student-centered, so that students are the active participants in their own education. They aren't being lectured to, but they have places where they can learn, and learning from each other in collaborative locations. The creativity is fostered in ways to be able to bring out the new ideas that the kids have. Being fluid and flexible so that it can be reconfigured into areas that will meet the needs of different styles of learning.
Is that our library? Is that it?
That's- that's
I mean,
all
not
right.
Yeah.
That's the old thing.
That's our multi.
And this one,
That's ours too.
being connected to nature. Studies have shown that these are the types of environments that 21st century learners will need. So, on to the educational adequacy scorecard. There are 97 questions on here. They're weighted. This was put together by the Council of Educational Facility Planners international. Some school districts use the questionnaire as it is. Some school districts like to modify the questions. These questions are used as a baseline for any potential future improvements. The items that you were talking about is this, consider the reconfiguration of the office area. Because when you do that, you might look at a cost-benefit analysis, and this is the benefit side of the cost-benefit analysis for any future improvements that might be considered. There are 6 different categories that are in here, but to make it very clear, this rates the building. It doesn't rate the staff, the parents, or the students. It's about the building and how the building functions. So it's not about any of the personalities or persons in the building. All in all, the school came up with a 63.6% rating. That wasn't surprising based on its age and a couple of the major issues that you all are aware of that the building has. The first section is called the school site. There are 10 questions there. Scored very well in its location, and it's well sited within the community. But the site could use some development. There are some erosion issues, and there aren't any play fields on the site itself. Those are leased through the community, and so that was an area where the grading came down. The second section is on the structural, electrical, and mechanical features. We graded this. We had the engineers confirm that where we were on this grading was correct on their perspective. And I should back up and mention that Tim and I walked through the building with Mr. Blackmer, and then Dr. Sophie joined us, and the 4 of us together went through and did this grading. This wasn't Tim and I doing it. It was the people that use the building on a regular basis that helped with this to come up with these grades.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Just for my own clarification purposes, number 2.3, you say the foundations are strong and stable with no observable cracks. So by saying borderline, you probably found a few cracks and a few instability. Okay.
Right, exactly. And the roof is, for the most part, pretty good, and there's good egress and flow throughout most of the building. But the big issue on the building is a lack of accessibility in restrooms, drinking fountains, the upper level of the library. There are some significant issues there. The building also doesn't have a sprinkler system, which it's not required to have. It's grandfathered in, but without it, it comes down in the grading. And there's also a lack of variety in the classroom sizes throughout the building. You have some smaller classrooms, but they are used for the special ed, and they are only on the upper level of the library, completely remote from the other classrooms, which kind of creates a burden in being able to just quickly say, let's go break out into some smaller classes, smaller groups, and study something. They're too remote from where the classrooms are. The third section is plant maintainability. It's not about how well it's maintained, but how the building was built to be able to be maintained easily. And so there's some low maintenance materials that are used on the building. It's brick and a good roof on most of it. So it did well on that. But there are some storage needs throughout the building, and that was primarily the issue that became the lower grades on that issue. The building safety and security. Safety is safety of the people in the building, and the security is the security of keeping the students safe inside of it. The safety is more slip and falls kind of issues. For the most part, the building is very safe, has good security features throughout it. But there are a couple of issues. The steps in the library are steep, and there are some dead-end areas that don't have 2 means of egress in that upper level of the library.
So let me just ask a clarifying question. I look at that safety section, and I as an engineer, I think it's kind of like OSHA kinds of issues. It's not safety as related to person breaking into the building with the intent to cause harm kind of issue.
Even though we call this the educational adequacy, it's truly it's a school facility appraisal, and we use the phrase educational adequacy sort of as our shorthand. The 5th section is technically the educational adequacy section. what are the spaces of the building that are used for education, and how do they function? And the gym and the band room are obviously in good shape and do well for the district. The library is an area of deficiency. The questions number 515 and 516 don't specifically say it, but they are questions about your special ed spaces. And so the special ed spaces being located in the upper level of the library, remote from the classrooms, make them not convenient for the students that utilize those services. The other area that creates some of the lower grading in this was the office area. The nurse area doesn't provide a lot of privacy, and there are some flow issues in that entire area. And the last section is the educational environment. This is more of a subjective area. How does the building look? And it looks good. It's a pleasant building, it's a good environment for learning, but there is a lacking of collaboration areas for the kids to get together and work together in the 21st century learning environment. So all in all, the building came out with a 63.6, which is common for a building of this age. You were given in the report a ranking of that, and the 63.6, excuse me, as I flip to this, would fall in the borderline area, a building that would require major upgrades or additions to deliver the 21st century learning and support multiple learning.
It's page 20.
Yes, thank you, page 20 of your report. Again, this is used as a baseline of how good does the building work as a school, so that you look at future improvements to the building. You can see what the cost benefit would be. If you improve the office area, the score goes up by 100 points. If you improve the handicap accessibility, the building will go up by 50 points. I'm pulling those numbers out of the air. I haven't added up what that would be in improvement-wise. But you can look at how does the dollars that might be spent help improve the educational environment. I also wanted to back up, I skipped right over it. It was the question on the music spaces, and we struggled with that one because the band room is great and the choir room is not good, and so we struggled with how to grade it. So we gave it a D because C would be right in the middle, and we felt that the needs of the choir area outweighed the goodness of the band room. So that one was one of the areas that we struggled with as we went through it all.
So we might have an A and an F.
You might have an A and an F. Exactly.
How do you recommend your clients use this? Like, what is specifically the next step that you would see or suggest that they take this and do what now?
As you want to.
Well, I was just gonna say, this is prime for when the district starts its strategic planning about where it wants to go with its educational mission and its real estate to support that mission. You can start to target known deficiencies that are in this to say, we really got to address this as part of it. Whatever we do in the next step, we really need to address this, this, and this. So it's meant to be a tool to help you start thinking through options about how to think about stuff. If you got into that and you wanted feedback from us about pros and cons or cost benefit, that's the purpose of this. This is really, this whole report really is to benchmark the facility and prime you for taking your next step about how to think about your resources and your real estate and what's the best use of your dollars going forward.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I have a hard time trying to put a lot of this information together. For example, we're graded very low on the choral activity, on the choral facility. Yet I think we've probably got one of the best choral programs around.
Right.
So I'm having, I think it's very subjective and very difficult to try to put some of this analysis into where we put our money.
Right. And because we were grading the facility as opposed to your staff and your students on the choral, for example, the room is not the room that you would design starting from fresh for the choral program that you have.
That's sort of the key piece to understand, that this educational adequacy assessment takes the mindset that says if you were going to do a new facility today, you'd use 21st century planning criteria. And so this is measured against that criteria.
How far you are away from that
Exactly.
ideal.
So case in point, so a choral room that's in the basement here, it doesn't have the volume that you would plan and design for a brand new choral room. It has a column in the middle of the room. That column impedes the student's ability in the back row to see the screen and to see what the teacher's writing on the screen. So there's issues like that, so that, again, the way to think about this is the benchmark that establishes where you're at right now as compared against 21st century planning criteria.
But we have to assume that even with 21st century planning, there's always limitations. I mean, one would decide to put a school together. I remember this conversation about the elementary school. There's always a trade-off because of money consideration or site restrictions or, things like this. And so it's important also to put this in some sort of context because, there's clearly, we can use that tool to prioritize things, but this is not necessarily also a wish list that would be completely devoid of constraints of any kind.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
And there's, with any project, and this was very true of the elementary school, there's a universe of issues, constraints and resources and priorities that whatever solution you start to think about, that you have to first develop and create the objectives you want to achieve and then prioritize those objectives in that universe of issues. So you're absolutely right. There's things like that.
Tim, I have a quick question for you,
Yeah.
kind of like a good bang for your buck question. So let's just pretend, because I hear probably the most about the media center at the middle school, because our middle school students need the collaboration space, etc. So let's just say we picked that as one of our projects, and we did this assessment again. I'm assuming that, first of all, the area in the media center, all those points would go up. But then in the area where it talks about collaboration space and small groups, and possibly even if we work some of the special ed work within that media center, all of those areas would go up. So you can really take a look at where any projects that you would get your biggest bang for your buck.
Sure.
I want to make sure I've got that understanding.
Yeah.
Well, do you make recommendations? I mean, one of the areas where we got an F was space for small groups and remedial instruction is provided adjacent to classrooms. Well, we may say we want to improve on that. That seems like an architectural project. Do you make recommendations? Here's how you can reconfigure the space you have
We
to meet that need.
absolutely will. We did not want to prejudice you at this point because you are going into your strategic planning. So we didn't want to prejudice that. But absolutely, once you establish your objectives in your strategic plan, we can come back and help you think through some of these issues and how they might be implemented. Case in point, high schools we did downstate where they were wanting 1950s high school, double-loaded corridor, and they wanted to totally transform the school to deliver collaborative 21st century project-based learning. Well, one of the things we did as part of that process is we curriculum mapped the school. We literally overlaid and mapped where how the curriculum happens in the school, but using 21st century planning criteria. And what that started to illustrate is where strategic additions may need to be thought about in order to create additional real estate to give a higher square foot per student to get the flexibility for breakouts and collaboration areas.
How does the square foot per student match up with the facility we have now?
For 21st century?
Well, I just know that our student population tends to kind of be on the decline right now. And I'm just wondering, is there a rule of thumb?
Brand new schools, 21st century schools are doing planning in the neighborhood of 40 to 45 square feet per student in a classroom in a learning environment. That's because you can have directed learning with obviously lecture style, but taking the furniture, breaking it up and making it into different pods and project-based learning. So the square foot that the building was built under, I haven't done the calculation, but I'm guessing it's probably much closer to 25 or 30 square feet per student.
In the actual classrooms or looking at the building as a
No, in
whole?
the actual classroom.
Oh,
In the example you just used with the downstate school where you completely reconstructed that, give me some idea of how they go about financing that. Is that through a referendum process? Is it through an estimating process with respect to ongoing budgeting examples or
No,
not?
that's all.
Sales tax.
Sales, no, that was a 1 cent sales tax they did.
So they just increase the sales tax in that case? Okay.
There's a county sales tax, which Lake County is not voted in, but in some counties, 1 cent of sales tax goes to the schools for construction, but that is divided up amongst the school districts based on population. So within that county, if there's 18 school districts, whoever has the most highest number of enrolled children gets the highest percentage. It's prorated based on enrollment.
Not
We don't
available to
have
us.
that option in Lake County.
So this
If
leads
it's not, it's going to be a referendum.
this leads me to think about, the best way to use this information going forward. We have a number of financial decisions that we're making, and we're putting we're well into our strategic planning, and thinking out loud, is this something that we ask our facilities committee within the strategic plan? We hand this to all, I guess I'm asking is, what have you seen done at other districts if you have that kind of been that involved?
That's usually the next step, is especially if you've got a strategic plan that's already formed or is forming, that would go to the
Or a
facilities.
building committee.
Facilities.
To help prioritize or rank or whatever it is they do with it.
Yeah, so you got the administration and the curriculum side that's delivering that information into what I'll call the project.
Yeah.
And then the facility side delivering their information. It meets up and then you hash through goals and objectives and define what it is you want to achieve.
What is our goal based on this as a beginning point?
I was really hoping, and I realized that BLDD wasn't asked to provide this, but I was really hoping at this stage in the game we would have some information about the realm of possibilities we were looking at. And I don't know what it takes to generate that, or, people wanna.
It would only take having the board give us some priorities to help you think about what if.
But the board doesn't work there every day. So from my perspective, it's a guy like Nate who's in the school every day who understands and works with the needs, but has to come forward with what he thinks needs to be prioritized. Makes a plan, a proposal, recommends it to the board, and then it goes further on from there.
Yeah.
It's not up to us to decide that.
Forgive me, I'm used to taking all my direction from the board. So yes, that would be the natural flow
Yeah.
from the administration to the board to us.
Because one of the things that I noticed, the interior walls are flexible, we get an F on that, right? That allow for flexibility. And just when you look at the layout and the square footage that you just referenced, it's hard to figure how the classrooms could have the kind of individual workspace or the collaborative areas that you would build in a 21st century school. So it's just puzzling, looking at the puzzle.
Going from 25 square foot per student to 45 is a hell of a bite. And
Oh,
the
sure.
reality is that,
Different
it's
changing.
impossible, and, so that would means an addition. So at that point in time, this is, we're talking about a referendum, there's no doubt. I mean, if we're willing to go that route. It's like expanding your hotel capacity.
Well, probably so, but I'm wondering if we don't have to maybe go all the way with it. If there are fixes that you, as you walk through the building, see, well, if you knock down this wall or reconfigured the space, you would buy some individual learning space. That would be something I think we'd be interested in hearing about.
And the restructure of the media center
Mm-hmm.
would do a lot. We've done some discussion on that. Redoing the entrance to the building and reconfiguring the office area would also do a lot. And both of those add big bang money. I know in brief discussions with Mark today, at some point there was some discussion about making the property playing field for some sport. I'm not sure. Nate, you might have to help me with that. So, and I don't know how complicated that would be. I know that we're still getting the rubble from the previous building coming up from the grass there. So there may be some things that we can do, Because we've got great teaching and learning going on in the building, but you'd be surprised how much a media center. Leanne and I toured, what was that, Aptekissick Junior High?
Yeah, Buffalo Grove, I think.
Yes, in Buffalo Grove. And I mean, just that media center alone, no matter where you went in the building, you just kept remembering the media center.
So there are some projects that you could do that would make a pretty big bang, relatively speaking, for the buck. I mean, I'm concerned about the accessibility issue too.
And it would seem to me that where you would realize the most instructional benefit would be one of the top priorities. The choral room might be nice, it might increase our points quite a bit, but that I don't know the numbers, but may service and benefit a much smaller group of students. But if we can do changes that would benefit a greater number of students, I would think that would be one of the higher priorities. And I'd be interested in hearing what suggestions you would have about how that can be done without changing the footprint
But
of the school.
I think it would be useful if staff actually
Right.
looks through that list,
Mhm.
and then you guys say, basically, we absolutely need this, and you guys are gonna have to think about it, because it really is a great, is critical for us. So, reconfiguring the entrance, probably the media center and so on and so forth, I don't know. But I think that input has gotta come from you guys, and then at that point in time, then we can decide, okay, we're gonna go to somebody, and then we're gonna decide to price this out, so we can actually work it either in a referendum or in a sort of CapEx type thing, that we would have, every year. So we accumulate and we say, okay, year blank, we pull the plug and we redo the media center, and it's gonna be, 1.2 mil, but we're gonna accumulate this over 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, that's another way of doing it too.
It seems like for them to generate those recommendations, though, they need, probably from the strategic planning process, or maybe also from the board somehow being involved, an overall guide as to, this is where we want to land. Either this is the number of points we want, or somehow describe what level, because they're achieving education there right now. So what level of building
I
are
know
we
what you're
looking for?
saying, but I think that it's we should not be obsessed by the points. Get what I'm saying? I think that what matters.
Some kind of criteria.
I
I
know,
think she's saying.
sometimes
some kind of
criteria,
description of where we think it should be.
That may be an easier fall through after we go through the strategic plan next
Yeah.
week and look at some of our
But we do need
objectives
some
on
maybe
that.
big picture guidance from strategic planners, the community, and then we take it and.
But it has to be driven by the staff. I mean, there's no question.
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Driven by the staff, yes.
Yeah.
But I
And
think
the
the
staff
big
is part of the
picture.
strategic plan, but if all the things I think of that is useful, the strategic plan is useful for, I think this is it. What kind of school district do we want to be?
Absolutely.
Do we want to be a 20th century school district for the next 2 decades? Or, how urgent is it to the people who are looking at the educational environment of this town, that we make some of these
Yeah.
changes?
And the first
Because we
thing,
could ask for the least expensive, we could say, we want the least expensive solution you can do to maintain scores where they are. That would be one way to put it out there. Or we could say, we want to see a school that, ranks higher as far as points, or some other way of describing it, because we feel that contributes to real estate values and provides a better education to the kids, or something like that.
I think this could be a terrific way to promote the schools, and I would hesitate to say that we want to promote the schools as a district that ranks borderline. Right now, we're at 63.6 as borderline.
Well,
whatever
but I
that
think
means.
that the
And I don't think
promotion,
that that's where the town wants to be.
but the promotion of the school is in the school scores. I mean, with due respect, I like you all, but I went to a school that was 250 years old. So by your analysis, it'd be like 10%, and it was a terrific school. So I think that, yes, the building matters up to a certain point, and I think that, do the teacher matter more than the building? Hell yes. If you have a great librarian, it's going to make the media center come alive. It'd be great to have the whistles and the bells and whistles. But I also think that we have to be channeling. I mean, if we have to think about the way we channel the money and probably put it where there is the most bang, and I think that direct contact by teacher with students is usually where you get the most bang. I mean, I can teach in a smart classroom, but if I am not in touch with the student, I'm a lousy instructor, and there may be iPads and computers in the classroom, but it's not necessarily a good experience. So we have to be careful of not getting too seduced by the bell and whistle, and sort of think about ultimately when it gets down, on behalf of all those that teach, it's really the teacher that makes a difference.
I think we have there's a lot of big picture strategic planning questions that could be answered that can take us out several months, how we want to use this and how we want to look at it and how we want this to guide us and the staff based on feedback from the community and feedback from the teachers and the staff. Another concern I have is, how do we use this information today? We have a bond question to talk about. We're making some big decisions about money in the bank and using it and bringing our reserves down. Are we able to use this information intelligently in guiding us in that conversation, so that we don't jump the gun on a bond issue? I don't know.
Well,
I don't know how you do that, so I just throw it out.
Well, my feeling is, first of all, and I've spent my entire life in the corporate world. One of the things that used to bug me was when my board tried to tell me how to run my business or how to structure my layout. I mean, I'd like to hear from Nate and Jean with respect to what they think the priorities are, what they think is going to improve the educational process. To me, that's the most important thing. That's going to take some time. That's not going to be done in a day or two or maybe even a year. I'm not quite sure. But a formal process needs to be investigated. The priorities need to be established. They need to be presented to the board. We need to evaluate them. We need to make the best judgments we can possibly make. So I think that's completely outside of our bond discussion, to tell you the truth. And we have,
Well, it is
I don't know.
kind of relevant to our finances.
it is, no question. And I do think we need to address the earlier inadequacies that exist, the $1.4 million. I think we need to be mindful about those and get those corrected quickly, or as quickly as we can. But the second process is a more thoughtful process, I think, because it does engage a number of different areas. And again, I'd like to hear from management.
And it should align with the strategic plan
Absolutely.
that has taken into account everybody in the community. And I will tell you, some of these items are gonna be a lot easier after you've gone through the strategic plan with all the different groups next week. Some of them are gonna go hand in hand. And then we can all sit down, because we spent part of this morning again looking at what does this all mean to us? And it's an even bigger picture, and it does take some time to go through it.
So there doesn't seem to be any disagreement among people that we need to get a more thoughtful discussion moving forward on this, as John just so eloquently put. But I still come back to my question, is there a way to use this information today, short term, for some of the other conversations we're having about?
I think that we cannot tie this to the bond issue.
No.
I think that's a real problem. And I'll tell you why. Because what we're addressing tonight is really the issue of the reserve. And indirectly the bonds, okay? So I also think that one of the most valuable conversation when we look at facilities is also to really look at facilities, but also take into consideration the financial, the way we're going to finance the stuff. So if we decide, okay, we're going to modify the bond because that's where you're going, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to keep all that big reserve, then what it does is that it's a big pot of money that we have that we're going to spend regardless of whether it's going to be really beneficial and have a bang for our money. I'm really concerned about this. I've seen a lot of facilities improvement where a lot of energy goes toward doing this, but it doesn't really make a lot of difference to the overall educational results. So I'm really concerned about that.
The other thing is that by taking action, one of the actions on the bond issue, we will save $2.5 million over the next 10 to 12 years. That's $200,000 a year we can save, which we can put back into some of these.
In a CapEx fund,
In the CapEx fund,
absolutely.
into these ventures. So we need to take action. I don't want to delay this any longer. I think we need to have a sense of urgency about this bond matter. We get it fixed.
And then take it into consideration when we look at our
Absolutely,
levy.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay, so do we have any more questions specifically for the guys from BLDD?
No.
About the reports that we've talked about?
That's a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much. Thanks for putting up with this other conversation. Okay, so now we're gonna have a conversation about the district office, and Jean is gonna start that off for us.
And I have a very short report on this. Because this part's open session, and when we get into some of the details on this, some of it'll be closed in the future. We currently have our district office housed in our industrial park at 900 North Shore Drive. Our lease expires on June 30th of 2017. We use 3,348 square feet of office space, and we have a small office area for storage. If anything, as you see in the study that we just had, as you look at all of our storage surrounding our buildings, we are very, very short office space. The other item at the district office that we would need to have most likely is our head of buildings and grounds really needs an office at the district office because there's no room at the elementary building.
Isn't he currently in a closet somewhere?
He's currently sort of in a closet at the elementary
And the
school.
future warming kitchen space.
In the future, what?
Warming kitchen space.
If we ever went for a
Is he
food
getting the
service.
coffee aroma?
No, that's at the district office.
Starbucks.
So, with all of that in mind, I will share with you that we did meet with the realtor for the two pieces of land by the elementary school. I have information on that. At this point, I need a little bit of direction from the board, because what I'm excited about is everything's coming together.
Everybody needs to know too that just if you don't recall, many of the issues when you discuss real estate are supposed to be done in closed session. So.
But we
we're
need-
gonna talk a little bit superficially here.
So we should only cover here the things that are appropriate for open session, is what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
And really what I need to know at this point, I could move forward, but I think that what I'd like is a board member or two. Mark would like to be involved, so we would need one more board member to volunteer if we decided to move forward, meet with the realtor, look at the land drawings. So we could have volunteers, we could take no action now, or we could just wait until all of our processes are over.
Other
But
than volunteers, are there things you need guidance on that we can talk about?
Yeah, let's get the process going.
we need to get the process going, and we're at that point now, but at this point I would need,
So other than volunteers, that's all you need for tonight?
yeah, if we could,
And
if,
clear direction that
Yeah.
we move ahead.
and check out costs and whether the land is big enough and what we would do, and,
I volunteered Chris.
Chris, would you like to do that?
You know
Well-
about, you know,
Yes.
Is
So-
there consistent feedback across the board to Jean that we are interested in looking into moving the school district offices out of the
Eventually.
office space?
I mean, they have a for sale sign up, we might as well hear what they have to say about it, I don't, there's
At
cost,
this
you have to
point, we're just
consider cost
investigating.
and
I mean,
have to
the
look at
question
cost
is
and
this,
what you
if
really
we,
need is office space, so.
the question is this, if we could move the district office in a location that is close to one of the school, all right?
Mm.
Is it beneficial to the kids and the school district in general? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we're all in an agreement, right?
Rich?
So,
I've
Yes.
seen silence over there. You think so?
he's thinking.
I don't know. Just curious.
What's your question?
we're just gonna investigate it more, is that all right?
In favor of us investigating, looking.
I've been, yes, I voiced my opinion on that because I think it's ridiculous what we have now.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
what puzzles me about the additional possible property is we have this empty lot, a big empty lot where east used to be. And it seems a little silly to me to think about buying some other land when we have all that land. I know that eventually a new middle school would go there, but
And
It's just-
Susan, it's good that you brought that up, and that's why this all fits in the conversation.
okay.
Because if we do consider building a middle school and we build onto the existing property, we would probably keep the gym area and
Yeah.
the band area, and then we wouldn't have room for
Right.
another office
That's-
building. So that's why it's important that we look at all these options now and put together a
Because you would,
plan.
if they,
That's
built-
too
if we
great.
eventually built a new middle school,
Yeah.
you would build it so it attached to the gym.
Right, to the
you
gym,
keep
I
more
understand.
parks. So any office space that you tried to attach to the current building would sit where that was gonna
I
happen,
see.
and then it would cost you so much more to do that.
Yeah,
So still
I
have-
understand what you're
Plus, I
saying.
think there is a ratio. Isn't there a ratio? I remember this from the elementary school. There's a ratio of size of square acreage in relationship to the size of the school and the number of students.
Yes, you are
That's a
correct on
standard.
that.
Okay, so I remember this
Per school
because
code.
I spent 28 hours in hell when we did the elementary school years ago, because that was when we did the trade, was the park district. You remember this? So, you may not remember this, but so
We read it in our board packet,
Uh,
so it's in there.
so probably, to your point, yes, it's empty, but should we need that land in the future, then we jeopardize possible additions and so forth.
And don't forget, we could get big bang for the buck and add some football, or not a football, but an athletic field there.
Don't start a rumor about a football field.
I didn't say football, athletic.
Yeah, and
Field hockey.
Just gotta use my wording correctly. How about if we put in a swimming pool?
Yes.
Is there more guidance, Gene, that you would like to get out of this evening's conversation?
No, I have my guidance on that one. I
Okay,
am done
So
with
now we're
that.
going to move to item C, which is the park district agreement, and Gene's gonna start us with that.
This is exactly gonna be the same thing as the district office, so my items are very short. I detailed the narrative of our land swap agreement with Park District and School District 65. At this point, I would share with you a couple things. We're in the middle of looking at facilities, we're in the middle of looking at finances. Several of you have mentioned, let's sit down and talk to them and see if we can work through this. So I'm bringing to you a proposal that we either A, have no action right now, B, that we have board members, two of you to sit down and discuss with maybe their administrator and their board administrator, or their park district administrator, or we can just wait and see where facilities study goes and bring this back up in the spring.
Have they ever said why they don't just go ahead and have a parking lot built? Did I miss something?
They don't
It's
need
built, it just needs to be repaired.
is that right?
And I'm gonna
And
be,
it's not in bad shape. I
No.
think
They
that
just
it was
repaved
it was a
They just
con-
Well, the parking lot they refer to here is at the
That's-
old West School.
Yeah,
So
that's
this
so
is
right.
not the new.
But we sold that. That's not the same. This is a new parking
Let's-
lot in
Yeah, but we
theory,
screwed
right?
them in the process.
Jane, you wanna answer
They-
that question?
No,
The
we,
existing parking lot was sold with the building to the buyer, leaving no parking lot there for the park district. However, if that
Correct.
parking lot that's there is still usable and it is used for their softball games and things like that.
and there's a
Unless the
memo
owner
about the
decided not
misunderstanding
to
that
allow.
took place. But we have funds set aside to build them this parking lot. And have we ever heard what is stopping them from saying,
I-
okay, just build it, or no?
I have not done anything with this.
Okay.
So, because it's a community issue, I really think it would be nice if we sat down with members of their board, two or less, their administrator and ours, just to kind of talk through.
Why don't we do the same thing that we're doing for the real estate issue and ask a couple people to sit down with you and Ron?
I would like to do that.
Couple people.
I'll volunteer to do that.
Okay,
I'll
John.
do that one too.
So John and Leanne.
And Leanne, got it.
I can't imagine that they're gonna want us to build a parking lot where there's a parking lot that we're free to use until the business owner decides we aren't free to use it, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Even if we are paying for it, why we would do that? It'd be one thing, I suppose, if the building owner put a fence around it and said, no, you can't use it, then maybe there'd be some kind of urgency to it. But right now, it seems sort of ridiculous.
Well, and then the question lies, Susan, which is why I said maybe one of the options would be no action.
Yeah,
Some of
that's
the
where I
board
am.
members have said, let's just write them a check and get it off the
No,
books.
I don't. Why do we need to do that?
So, and other board members have said, no, let's not do that, so we'll just look into it and report back, and then that's looked into for the next 5 years.
Okay.
Anybody else want to say something on that issue? Okay, we're gonna move on to our bond follow-up. and introduce, I'm sorry, I'm not sure your name, but from
David.
Blair.
David Abel from William Blair.
Welcome, thanks for coming, we appreciate it.
Welcome.
So you're not Liz, right?
No, I'm here as a substitution for Liz.
Just to make sure.
Learn a lot in the exchange process here. So if we haven't got what we need to get there fairly quickly,
Well, thank you for coming, we appreciate it.
happy to be here. Very instructive to watch the process in front of you to hear how funds might help you put the work. The book that you have is got the first 5 pages, very familiar material. I just do a quick sentence on each and then we get right into what to do with these here to be here. Page 1 here obviously shows time and a way when we face directly declining property values or set valuations in small transactions designed to provide some stabilization. So let's look at slide number 2. And then full debt levy was abated, I presume, from operating surplus, which by itself looks like it creates quite a change in the tax rate down and then back up. Taken by itself, this is just a levy for debt. 2 things strike me about this. First is that there's a growth assumption here, and there's a way of thinking in the past that we always have growth and we can build down underneath it and have a stable rate. Rate rating related to that, I'm not so sure based on things that I've seen throughout the entire country that that's the thing we should be doing going forward. Be a little bit more structured in our growth assumptions, be not quite so optimistic, give us some safety, in other words. Let's hit slide 4. The abatement of 2012 and results in those 2 yellow numbers, a decline and an increase and then a second increase. This is sort of a soft landing concept. This is designed to help mitigate. Page 5. This to me sort of sets the table. By itself, we've got sort of a rapidly inclining debt profile that has with the operating levy is a relatively small complement, but perhaps it can be a bit more level. It's got a greater rate of increase than the operating levy does. It changes the entire pitch of the levy to be steeper generally than some of all things. So this, for me, is sort of sets the table how we might look at the operating surpluses in the most advantage way for you all. Where we're coming up with this, I've been given some guidance that 60% unreserved fund balance is a target. I don't know if that's the right number, perhaps, which would leave us $5,750,000 to consider applying against debt in various ways to flatten it out or result in a little bit more level debt service and less reliant on the growth. So that takes us to what we might just consider doing with the $5,750,000 all by itself, no bonds, simply cash placed in an escrow whose job it is to effect some levy abatements, and then at the right moment in time call the bonds in 2018 and 2012, or I mean 2018 and 2020. You'll notice in the separate column I don't have a mouse related mouse for these debt fees, debt service. That's the side designed to be sort of a wedge shape such that when we reduce the debt profile, reduce that against the debt profile, you get to a level debt service, revised total debt service of about $2 million a year.
Just a quick question. When you say less abatement using debt service funds, are those funds coming out of the reserve or are they already part of the 5.75 million?
5.75 million would escrow these bonds. Maybe the question you're asking is why do we not see anything happening in 2013?
No, I'm asking you to define for me what less column, the 1, 2, 3, 4th column from the right.
Yes.
It says less abatement using debt service funds. That $470,000. I'd like to know where that's coming from.
The payments on the bonds would be provided from the escrow, but the taxes would not be abated, so they will accrue to your debt service funds and then be used in 2015-16.
Okay, so that doesn't come out of the reserve.
No.
Okay,
That fills up because we didn't abate in 2013.
right. I understand that. Okay.
So the net cost, and I've heard this number this evening, net savings is around $2 million.
Right.
And this is mainly a result of the ability to call bonds.
Right.
So this results in hopefully a bit more of a stable tax rate regimen. And hands off an increased portion in the out year. We had to average circulated one page just like this. Might be a little bit small print that all the cases and scenarios.
Does everybody have that copy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're talking about, essentially option number one, the first pay. This would result in approximately $200,000 per year per typical home.
And the in-period abatements are the totals of the annual tax debt payments, correct? The 70, yeah, okay.
Except for the part that is not
Right,
indicated,
right,
which gets used
right,
for using.
right.
So if let's flip out this, look at that one, slide number 8.
We're gonna have to switch microphones, I think.
It's another.
Okay. All right. Is this any better? All right.
It's
fine.
For whom all
It's
is
a
listening.
TV thing.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Is this better?
Now the pressure's on.
Yeah, better than I didn't know that, I suppose. So here we go. The result of that wedge-shaped abatement, or the wedge-shaped selection of bonds to put in escrow and call, gives you a debt profile that has still an increasing front end, but tapers to level rather quickly. And with a modest growth in EAV, 1 to 2%, we hope we realize in the coming 5 years, the tax rate should gradually decline, which gives you a little bit of planning safety. So as I understand it, that's kind of the goal, to manage the previous assumption that we would have a greater rate of growth and produce a more stable, total debt service levy expansion amount.
That's right.
That's correct.
And I will comment here that you have a very conservative debt structure by and large. It's going to be done in 15 years, and the assets underneath this have a life that is considerably longer.
Right.
So there are the next 3 scenarios are just variations on this. Let's go to page 10. We can bring that level debt service down just a bit further by calling more bonds, and this would be for actual economic savings, and a very small refunding piece on the front that would amortize in approximately 4 years. And this is the little $1 million scenario. This is just a variation.
But it saves us another $400,000 over
Right.
option one.
And are the costs of issuing those bonds included in those estimates?
Yes,
I think
they are.
Liz said they were.
Yeah. Page 11 should show about what that looks like. I apologize for the tail, the red tail is going out. That should fall all the way down to 0.
Yes. What's zero?
It's
One-sided.
wants to be something.
Jane would like a definition of what short refunding means.
What does short refunding mean?
The bonds that would be taken out are longer life than the bonds that would replace them. So we'd have 1, 2, and 3 year maturity stage out. Let's go, it is the, I think the 5th column over, that ends in the column that ends with $10,000.
Yeah.
That would be the replacement debt service schedule, and as you can see, the column just to the left is taking a considerably larger bite out of the existing bonds.
Oh, I see, okay.
And
Right, but it doesn't make, it doesn't change in any ways the maturity date for the final payment of the debt. Okay,
No.
so it just realigns or reorganizes
Which
the
using-
maturity
Right.
within the debt.
And using lower interest rate bonds to do
Right.
Yes,
so.
the short end of our yield curve is very
Is-
low. It's
Right.
around,
Yeah.
cost of around 2% or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, that adds just a little bit of value, and that mainly comes from your ability to call the existing higher coupon bonds at an earlier redemption date. Third variation, this one is just for comparative purposes. What it does is really push debt service down a bit harder, and it does show a 5-year extension. On economic life and tax life, this would all be justified, but it's just for a point of comparison.
Also, I think why we wanted to see this was to make certain, or to level as best we can, to level that tax debt rate structure out over the years in a very even process, and that's what that intended to do. That was our request.
If you have new financing in the future coming in on top of it, this leaves the interest cost capacity in place to do so with highly efficient instruments rather than deferred interest costs.
Okay.
So this would be a defensive structure and planning for the future. Works better in low rates than high rates.
So on this sheet, the one pager, this
Mhm.
is reflected as a $2.0 million cost. But
That's
on
because-
the page 12 of the presentation, it's called a net savings, but presumably that's a net.
But it's a negative
That-
number.
That cost is in an absolute dollars over
Right.
time without
Right.
accounting for
Right.
discount rate or.
Because you're spending,
Right.
you're going out
Spending
5
money.
more
Right.
years
I
and
see, so
spending more
rather,
money.
because it's not in the parentheses, the
Yeah.
rest, the
Right.
rest of them are in parentheses, so it's, I see.
You have considerably
Net savings
greater
of a negative.
savings in the first 15 years, followed by 5 years of new amortization that
Right.
wasn't there before.
Right, I understand. That's sort of parentheses.
But you
like that.
pushed a can down the
Down the
road.
road.
Right.
Which I think is really problematic
Yeah,
because,
I
you
agree.
know, following the conversation we
Right.
had and,
Right.
you know, the life of the middle school, clearly, you know, we have to get ready to do something by 2028 or and substantially
Yeah.
we'll do other things way before
Yeah, I think we
2028.
would all agree with that.
So, and that's just a point of reference. It's not meant to be, the floating recommendation. Page 14 takes one more look at the reserve balance calculation, and if we would target a 40% rather than 60%, that would produce 8.75 million available to essentially prepay the 2008 bonds and some 2010 bonds, and that would result in what you see on page 15.
Yeah, I mean, that generates a larger savings, of course, but the expenses that we're taking more out of the reserve and maybe an uncomfortable amount out of the reserve, so that's what we have to think about.
Right.
You have, this is a very enviable fact that you have a reserve fund
Right.
balance that's healthy relative to revenues.
Right.
The only other one I've seen, and I don't see a lot of these, is the college to page, which is 67%, and you get a very strong bond rating on that account. A Moody's stable rating is a sort of an uncommon thing in Illinois. Just said that to the camera.
This option,
Oh, we got
There's
a
only
comedian,
people
we got a
watching that are my
comedian,
kids,
too.
you're okay.
Okay.
this option also does a much better job of flattening out the growth of the tax rate in the beginning of the process as well, which I think is a lot more appealing to us and perhaps taxpayers as well.
But that was a question I had for Liz, and it's not a lot of money, but you can use more abated dollars on option 3 in the earlier years to flatten out that tax rate as well.
Yes.
I mean, that's an option we have, but when you
But
really
then you're
look
still
at
kicking
it,
it down the road.
no, you're
No.
not. No, but
No.
when you look at it, you're talking
You don't
about
change the maturity, you just put more money.
upfront.
Upfront.
But when you're looking at it, you're talking about maybe $100 on a $750,000 house. It's
Yeah,
not a big
yeah,
amount of
it's
money
not,
to really
yeah.
worry about, considering the fact that you're going to be taking another $3 million out of reserves. See?
Yeah.
In all cases, we do have a step up in the rate from
Right.
2012 to 2013.
Right.
I mean, we're doing what we can to manage that, but I think the ongoing step and how we're using the escrowed funds but not abated in 2013 and 14 to glide path 15, 16, and 17 is where a lot of your longer term stability comes from.
Is the relationship linear? That is, option 1 has 5.75 defeasance and option 4 has 8.75. So if one were to split the difference and do 1.5 less than 8.75, would you get
Oh, yes.
2.7.
half the savings?
Yeah, within that range, it is linear. I mean,
2.7.
there's a point where we don't have enough bonds left to take out.
Right.
We've put 15 million
Diminishing
against it.
return.
But
Okay.
within this range, yes, if you were to go to a 50% fund balance, you would
Right.
get a solution that was right in there.
Right.
I think the one thing, just aside here for a second, that the taxpayers need to understand is that the tax the tax rate amount went to 0 last year, regardless of what the debt structure
Yeah,
piece is, and this year it's going to go up rather significantly. And
because we were at 0.
because we were at 0, but we're not going completely back to where we were
Exactly.
because of the abatement.
I don't know if it's fair to comment from 2011 to 2012, it was a considerable reduction.
Right.
So we're actually going back to what it originally was.
In,
Or closer
right,
to
It's
it.
almost
Yeah,
20%.
And we're preventing the substantial increase that was gonna
That's right.
happen in 2018.
I'm not sure who this question is for, but it's been percolating for the last hour or so. Let's just look at that $3 million, the difference between 5.75 and 8.75, and assume that stays in reserve. What could be done with that money? Does it just have to sit there and earn
Well,
0.9% interest?
Isn't that a part of our fund balance discussion that we need to have? Because
Well, I think it's relevant to this discussion, right? Because what we're going to do, what could we do with those $3 million other than defease the bonds is, I think, directly relevant.
yeah,
Is your thinking that we should defease more than the 5 mil in option number?
Maybe. What I'm trying to figure out is
Or can we
if,
use it for capital projects?
Thank you.
That's what you're
But-
trying to
So-
get at.
so-
part of our discussion for the fund balance was determine what worst case was, what we could use those funds for in all situations.
It's
I
in
haven't
here.
seen that information yet, except it's in the board packet.
Yeah, it's in the
So,
board packet.
From what I've learned so far, worst case, everything we can do, we got 1.4 million on upgrading the school, the facilities, and 1.5, I think, that Jane provided, so that's 3 million.
Worst case
1.5 for
scenarios.
Jane provided.
That's in your
It's in
board
your
packets
packet.
for worst case scenarios after the
Remember
fund
the what if
balance.
scenario?
Oh, the what ifs.
Right.
So the 1.4 I find much
But that's
more
not,
concrete than one if.
that's not what you're asking, though. You're asking, are there alternate ways to use this money?
So
for
what
capital
I know,
expenditure on improvements to the middle school, for example?
Thank you.
Pay cash as opposed to,
Well, but
Finance.
What I-
the
it's
3
like-
million, you know, there's the what if scenario. So the what if scenario may not be spent, and that gives you, $1.5 million in capex.
Could someone
I'm
tell
asking,
me-
can I just see if somebody can answer my question before we ask
please.
12 different questions? One relevant criteria or decision-making point here is between 1 and 4. Let's just take the simple ones, the straightforward ones. Between option 1 and option 4 is a $3 million delta in the defeasance. What my question is if we were to choose 1, would the $3 million just sit there in Northern Trust making 0.9% interest, or is there something else that could be done with that money?
I mean, it is a way of investing it to generate.
No. I
No.
mean,
Just-
She's saying in general, she's asking very
can it be
generally.
moved to capital expense? Can
We-
it be?
We spent most of the night talking about those options. We talked about improving the schools, and that came up to 1.4 outside the educational.
I'm asking a question regarding what is permissible under Illinois law. Can we put the money to use?
please inform us.
Thank you. Yes.
It can be used for one-time large expenditures such as capital projects.
Okay. That's all I needed to know.
And it can sit there as a fund reserve balance.
So the what ifs are things that we hope that will not occur. The
That's the
1.5.
worst, that
The
worst storm.
1.4, we didn't even, the 1.4 is just what needs to be fixed to the physical structure before you even get to educational assessment,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you could be saying, you guys could actually be on the same page, that it's okay to go down to a 40% fund balance as long as we have a plan for that. Or no, we stick it a step back. I misspoke. So what I'm hearing is that maybe one option is to stick with shooting for one of these options with a 60% fund balance and earmark that extra money. No,
Right.
I'm not saying that right.
No, I-
Defease down to
Yeah.
60%, and then take the rest of that money and use it for some kind of capital
Keep
improvement.
it in reserves until we
Yeah.
We know
finish
what
going
we
through the
can do with
strategic.
I think my
Yes.
preference would be to do something like that, because you shoot all the ammunition if you use the entire 8 million.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd rather use the
That's-
5.7.
Exactly.
Save the 3 for whatever we haven't anticipated, And in the future, we always have the option to go back and refund again for one time.
The defeasance here is a much less complex process than issuing bonds. It's a
My point-
relatively straightforward matter.
My
That's
point
why-
in the first question was you could, if our numbers are correct, and you weren't doing anything for under the educational assessment, you could take 1.5 more and defease further, and then take the 1.4 that's required to bring the buildings up to architectural standard, and you could get to that 40%. Even if you were aiming for 40%, there's two really logical ways you could do it and get the money to fix the schools.
And remember, we're still gonna have $9 million left.
Right,
I mean, a big chunk of money.
Which leaves some possibilities for
I-
if and when you
Once we,
decide.
because we're gonna need some time. I mean, we need time for the staff to look at these options.
Yeah.
I'd like to consider what those options are. I'd like to see some improvements in such a way, but I need to understand what they are and what your priorities are and what you'd like to get done. And there's no need to rush into that, really.
And how they fit in with the strategic plan. that the
Absolutely.
community
Right.
is-
Right.
But John, you would lean more towards doing option 1 than option 2.
No, I would do option two.
Two.
Can you explain to me, kind of, I want to know, because I kind of had my heart set on option 1. So what's, now that I'm looking at option 2, that looks like it's more beneficial to me, because it gives us savings still, but it also gives taxpayers bigger savings.
Can I try to answer that a quick? I've looked at this thing all weekend, and in fact, this is my
Yeah, we
chart.
don't-
So-
I like that chart.
Yeah,
Nice chart.
yeah, it's the only way I could understand it, so I
Very
forget,
good. So-
they enhanced it. But two things here. One is we see another $400,000 in taxpayers' savings, which we can put back into educational requirements if we really need. Those are gonna come back to us. And secondly, we level that tax rate out a little more, the future tax rate.
What I want to look at.
So in future years, it sticks right around 33, 32, 31, 30, instead of going up to 35, 34 cents. And it doesn't cost us anymore. It's a much better option, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
I like the idea of doing option 2, and then once we're through the strategic plan, we've looked at what may need to be done at the middle school, as you said, we can always go back.
Yeah, now that I understand that there's not a restriction
On the use of
on
funds.
the use of the funds,
Which
it
I think
seems
is a good
to me
question.
that's the
I
way
mean-
to go.
Yeah.
Did I just, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
On option 2, there's a component to option 2 that doesn't exist on any of the other 4. If you look at how it's titled, and I think Liz was trying to clarify this morning, less abatements from future sources. The thought there was that you have a surplus generating paradigm generally, and that you would have the ability to come up with these additional amounts from other sources to help manage the rate. It's not required that these be in there, but they're given presentational.
So
additional-
fine $470,000.
Right, over the next 4 years.
Shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, I just wanted, that's a difference from how the other worked, and I wanted to
Right,
make sure.
right.
that
I understood that.
It's an extra 470.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now-
It's accounted for, but it's just.
It is accounted.
Oh, okay, all right.
I just had one question. Our fund balance as of 6/30 was 16,777,000.
Say it again.
Our fund balance as of the end of June was 16,777,000.
Change.
Yeah, but the end of,
Yeah.
Is that correct?
but we're gonna run a
Okay,
deficit.
and then if we take the 5.75 out of there, how is it we've gone all the way down to 60%?
Because, go ahead.
They're projecting out to the end of this fiscal year next June, so we're gonna be spending more money than we're taking in this year. So we're gonna spend away some of our fund reserves this year, just in
In addition
operating.
to the 5.7.
So we're really
Plus
measuring
the
it at the end of
1.1
June.
abatement.
Yes.
Right. We're running a deficit this year.
June of 14.
Okay.
I'm curious to see, it sounds like I'm hearing some consensus, but I haven't heard from Julie and Rich, kind of where you guys are on which option you like.
Well, did I understand you to say with regard to option two that there was some, well, let me state it differently, that option one, a pure defeasance, was an easier thing to do than option two? And can you talk about that?
Oh, there's only, in option 1, we're simply providing, giving direction to a trustee to launch a notice of call for bonds. We'll file an abatement certificate against those defeased bonds, and that's
That's it.
fairly well it. In
Straightforward.
option 2, there is the issuance of, even for a small amount of bonds, you still have an offering document, you still have a disclosure.
Because you have a
document to
refi.
prepare. Right.
Another $1 million.
So are there hidden costs in doing that, going that extra step? that aren't reflected in the numbers?
No,
here?
they're reflected in here.
Okay.
I don't
That's a
have
good
them in
question.
front of me. They're reasonable and customary.
Mhm.
Cost of, what
Cost of
letter
insurance.
cost you mean, right?
It's, bond
Oh,
counsel,
whatever cost they need me.
underwriting,
Mhm.
Moody's rating.
So everything it takes to issue that new.
Which is
Right.
what, 25, 30 grand?
For option, I think it might be a little bit more than that.
But, but these are our net
Yeah,
results.
these
right?
are,
They
these are
are
presented
here.
net of those.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
What do you think, Rich?
Well, I think having 60%, drawing it only down to 60% is extremely conservative. And I would be more for drawing it down to 40%.
I'm showing an expense estimate of around 40,000 for
Okay.
option two.
Yeah, okay. That's okay. And what about a non-financial expense or cost, if you will, in terms of timing or anything like that? Is there anything that we're not seeing captured
That's a good
here?
question.
And we have to update the 2010 offering document, and everything that goes with that will be the most recent audited financial statement required, and I don't know what you have available yet. There's, capital markets processes that go through and bringing a disclosure document and offering bonds.
There's paperwork.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah.
Okay,
Long
so
time.
nothing
it's-
material, though? It doesn't
yeah,
sound like
it's-
there's anything
it's-
So
material.
how long would it take to finish this up, from your perspective?
If we voted on it on October 22nd.
We'd probably get it done in 6 weeks.
Before Christmas.
Yeah.
6 weeks till.
To,
That's the whole thing,
to Rich's point, you want to take the reserve down to 40%. My gut feeling is that because we're iffy with budget procedure and reserve, I would stay with the 60%. And then let's see how it plays out, because even with two, we always have the possibility of putting more money along the in 3-4 years, I'm making this up, to in defeasance. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's not like you're shutting out that possibility if that's the case.
Well,
And when we're gonna, if we do really some interesting projection about the reserve, once we have some real cost, we'll see that the reserve can exceed 60%. And then when we pull the plug and we have accumulated what we need, then it may go down to 40% and it goes back up again. You see what I'm saying? That's how you ultimately
Also,
manage the
there
reserve.
are still a number of unknowns. We
Right.
don't know what's,
So
perhaps
I
some of
would
these
be more
improvements are.
conservative.
That's
I would
true.
stay with the 60%, but that doesn't rule out that depending on circumstances, we may not decide, oh, well, we have some extra money and we're gonna do it.
And strategic planning might say we want to spend some money at the middle school, we can draw down the reserves by paying cash.
How,
I think-
how big an expenditure does it have to be before we're obligated to go out to referendum? Is there any rule of thumb? Is there any?
Specific rules on that.
No, if you have cash in the bank, you
Do
can,
what you want.
you can pay for capital projects.
Yeah, but there is
There's-
also a
there's
basic
philosophical
philosophy as
issue.
far as the way you raise money. You know what I'm saying? Because the notion is that when you have a large capital expenditure, like the building of the middle school,
Right,
the benefits are in the future.
right, I understand.
So I think that's a matter of financial policy. So let's say if I
That
do
makes
a
sense.
hotel feasibility study, I'm going to have every year a capex amount,
Mhm.
which is making sure that the lobby stays very pristine, making sure that the bathrooms are going to be done on a regular basis, so I keep the value of the property. But if I decide to add 250 room, then it would be a capital expenditure, and I would go to bonds for that.
Mhm.
Does that
I
make sense?
understand. I understand.
So
Is there
there's
any,
capex and capital expenditure.
So just to be clear, we're not adding 250 rooms to the middle school.
That would take care of our small groups.
I think we're pretty much all on the same page here. Can we not
agree.
vote
So I
on
think-
it
I
now
think
and get
We can't vote
done
now,
with it?
it's.
We can't vote now,
But
this
we
isn't
can
a
ask
voting
Jean
meeting.
to bring this to us for vote at the next meeting.
October 22nd,
And
not
I-
next
and I would
week.
suggest that
I'm
it
all
sounds
for
like
Is it
that.
time sensitive? Is it time sensitive? I mean, if
Well,
we have the crisis of October 17, will that?
if the government goes belly
Well,
up.
well,
I'm sorry.
given that you don't intend to abate on this current plan, we could go into January, I think.
So there's no,
In number
there's-
two.
we're fine. It jumps.
Yes, if need be.
So by next meeting is no problem. It's not putting us.
The interest
Yes,
rates
you've got,
aren't
you've got,
moving.
you've got.
Well, they could move if something doesn't happen
Right,
here in another
right.
week.
Yeah, right, that's.
They could
I
move
guess
big time.
They
Interest rates are not
That
likely
they
to
could
be-
move. The advantage that you have here is such a, you know, a good name and a high quality credit in this, such a short, you know,
Window.
the steep slope of the yield curve right down there. We've got great retail access and interest, and it will be, you know, flight to safety.
So is our guidance to Jean to ask her to work with Jane and William Blair to bring this to us for a vote at the next meeting?
Yes.
Would it be option 2?
Yes.
That's the one I
Yeah.
prefer.
Option 2. I think we're pretty consistent with Rich doing it. We'd like to go further.
Okay, so Jane and I will bring that for official vote at the October 22nd meeting.
Do, how
Good.
many, everybody's here? No, you guys are not, you're not here?
I'm not here.
You're gonna
I'm here, I'm here.
Julie,
You're gonna
Julie, you know, I don't know.
I do.
Cancel your plan.
How about you stay and I'll go for you?
Italy or bond?
Does
No, I
You
can-
know?
I can
anybody
support
have
option
any
two.
further questions for our representative from William
No.
Blair?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We
really
appreciate you
your
coming.
Happy to be here.
We
Thank you.
appreciate your patience. Okay, now we are going to move to item E, which is our fund balance policy. And Jean is going to review kind of where we left off, kind of review. She included her notes in our packet and going to help us digest that and to pick up where we left off and take some of those summary items, and if we think that there are obvious blanks that we've thought about since that time that we need to add, that need to be included in a future draft of a fund balance policy, we can add those. And if we want to refine what we've already got, we will do that as well. Because the intent is to come out of this meeting or the next with guidance for legal counsel to take a first stab at a first draft, and hopefully get us a first draft of the fund balance policy by December.
I'd like to add some things.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just gonna kind of set
Why don't we
the,
let Jean review
Okay.
where we left off?
Okay.
And then,
here's what I would like you to do. In a classroom in Lake Bluff right now, I would be having you all get up and do a brain break, but we don't have time for that tonight. So what I would share with you is this. Next week, we'll have strategic planning. That's our whole meeting. October 22nd, we're gonna vote on the bonds. We've got the levy discussion, and I'd like to finish the fund balance. Because then at the November, I think it's 5th meeting, when Terry Hodges comes, Terry will be already here to discuss our bullying/harassment policy. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to give her direction based upon what we come up with, so she can write a fund balance policy? So there's gonna be questions we need to answer to get to that point. So what I did, and these are my notes, so they may or may not make sense. I did the best as trying to type them all while everyone was talking. But if you turn to the last page, this is what I kind of want to capture. And then it's open, and I'm just going to take notes.
page
I think
55.
Page 55 if you're looking at
The whole
your board book. And I would just say a couple things. The things I highlighted in yellow are things that we need to consider. Many of you talked about having a fund balance policy by fund as a possibility. You talked about having some kind of a feedback loop. You talked about in the actual policy, talking about what the purpose of the fund balance policy would be. Many of you mentioned that you could have some information on there about how it might impact the bond rating. You didn't know if it needed to go in the policy or not for that. That was a discussion. Same with the recognition, the state recognition, whether we're on financial recognition or et cetera. Then we talked about the definitions, like are we gonna define the ed fund, or we talked about which fund balance are we actually looking at. There was some discussion on that. Should we have a range? Should we have a ceiling? Should we have a cap? As I think Chris mentioned when we were just having the last discussion, what's the trigger to get it, that we have to work on a plan to get it back within the range? And then something about stabilizing taxes. So what I would share with you, and then Mark had mentioned, which I added to my notes, we constantly need to be discussing budget, fund balance, levy, all within the same conversations every year. So with all of that in mind, I'd like your feedback, and then we can either, you can all do some homework on your own and kind of write through your notes so we can pull this together on October 22nd. It does not need to be done till November 5th, and it doesn't need to be fancy. I just have to have notes to give Terry Hodges.
We need to
So,
give her enough to take a first stab at it, right?
yes, that's all we're doing.
I also think it relates to something you said earlier, but something needs to be said in the policy that provides some direction to the board when we exceed whatever the cap is, or we go below, or we anticipate exceeding whatever the cap is, or we go below what the bottom is. So if it looks like we're gonna go above 60%, there should be some language in there that says what action the board needs to take to address that. And likewise, if they think they're gonna go below, it's not gonna be this board, it's gonna be some future board. If they think it's gonna go below, if the bottom is 25%, what action are they gonna take in anticipation of that?
The thing that, and what I would want to see is not necessarily what are we going to do, but if we are above reserve, why is it? In other words, is it
Determine the
accidental because of we levied too much money, or budget was not tight enough, or is it purposeful where we know that the next 3 years we're going to be above reserve because we're going to get back to 60% or 57% in 2021 because we are going to do blah, blah, blah.
So there needs to be a report explaining whenever we
Absolutely,
cross the
and
line.
the difficulty we're having
Why?
right now is that the projections forward, are very difficult for all of us board members to wrap our head around. I mean, by big categories and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So when there is a divergence, then, we have to know why.
Why, and as I did last year, if we've collected too much money, regardless of how we did collect that, then we might decide, or the provisions might declare that you must abate back those excesses to the taxpayers as they did
Correct.
last year.
But if we do our job properly, I would assume that this is not a scenario that is going to take place.
Hope so,
We'll have
but
planned stuff.
Or maybe there needs to be a meaningful plan put in place on what we're gonna do,
Yeah,
as
we're
opposed
talking-
to saying we have to abate it back, there needs to, because that may not be an appropriate thing to do
Right.
at some date in the future.
But we're, presumably this is gonna be set down for future boards. Hopefully, with our board, we won't have to face this situation. But I'm thinking about a board maybe 10, 15 years from now.
I wonder if you want to incorporate something in that suggests that part of our policy is to keep a leveling out of taxes or something to avoid significant swings from year to year. And that's one of the, is that one of the?
Well, I think that's a function of budgeting,
It does.
and that's a function of the reserve. So even if you have the perfect storm, and you anticipated, let's say, the horrendous special need case lawsuit, blah, blah, blah. If we have it, if we anticipated that possibility, it's gonna level out what we're gonna raise over the long run. There's no doubt, but because we'll have like a capital expenditure, a CapEx, and we'll know that, in 2018, we're gonna have to spend $400,000, and it's gonna have been raised. You see what I'm saying?
Well, 400 grand is a pretty insignificant
Well, but
amount.
I'm just throwing that number, you know what I'm saying? Well, for CapEx, it's not necessarily, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if you're gonna put
No.
400 grand in the middle school, it's gonna be, I'm not saying we're doing a new school. This is just maintenance and upgrading of some stuff.
Well, I'm just trying to get to the root of why is it we have the fund balance, and what are the things that should suggest that it float high, low, or, there should be some policies that we set.
So that's kind of what Chris had talked about in the beginning, having the report on why we actually went over that.
Mm-hmm.
And then something that, like a trigger, where we would have to have a meaningful plan.
And
on how to
fund
get back.
balance projection, 5 years ends.
Right.
Now, I realize that the 5 years get all iffy as far as projection, but at least you keep track of it and you roll those projection every year.
It's a living thing, so
At
it
least
always
you're
changes as
thinking
you
about
know
it.
more.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows you to plan better and to see the hiccup. Because also along the way, we're gonna get additional fund. If Stonebridge gets to be, and God willing, the real estate really picks up, then that's a substantial amount of money coming into the coffer. So at that point of time, to your point, we may say, well, we got that money coming in, maybe we can abate to that extent. Remember, new construction is not part of the Patel, which is a very nice, sweet deal. So if we want to do something in the middle school, that money may come from there. You follow what I'm saying? But we have to know when it's going to trigger, of course.
Do we want to talk about a range? To pin numbers
Well, the
on the
minimum
range?
should be 25%, obviously. That's the state requirement, so.
We
When
might
you
set,
define
but we
tw-
might set it, we know that the 25 is the state requirement, we might say, well, we'd like it to hang between 40 and 60, that if it goes below 40, it will trigger a discussion of what should happen, and if it goes over 60, it triggers a discussion of what should happen.
But what would we use that 40% for? That's what I'm trying to get at. We have, we're at about 16 million expenses, so 40% would be about 7 million.
Are you doing it as a percentage of
Expenses.
total budget?
Expenses.
Expenses.
Right. So
Right.
I'd like to know.
I don't want to put a
And that's what
percentage
we
on
talked to
board.
Jane about. What possibly, think way out, and I know you did, I think. What could we use this money for beyond the 1.5 million that you already laid out?
I don't know, Dr. Sophie and Ms. Rubenstein and I all met and talked about this list of the perfect storm and, you know, her global picture, Kevin's areas and capital expenditures, and, you know, we came up with our best scenario of the perfect storm for Lake Bluff 65.
And that's
Which
10
includes loss of revenue,
Right.
which includes pension reform.
Yeah, and I mean, that's 10% of our budget. 1.5 is 10% of 16, so 25% seems to me to be a pretty fair low end.
The
Pretty
only,
generous and conservative low end.
the only caveat from me is that depending on what we establish as this next levy and future levies, you can't just the next year go, you know what, we're gonna need some more money, we need to jack up the levy. You can't do that. You're subject to the property tax cap. So you're very limited in the revenue
But
side.
what is important for us to know is when you go back and you need to raise, and in other words, there is a 3-year horizon, right, on Patel?
There is, as long
Is
as
it-
each levy, the next year is less than the preceding year. So for 2012, which we cut, if we raise 2013 levy above that, that becomes your new base the following year. We can't go back to 2011 again.
But if it's below that,
If 13 is below 12,
then
which
you can still go
we're
back
not
to
gonna wanna
11.
do, then you can still reach back to 11.
So that's interesting. That's another scenario where you could actually sort of come up with a trigger and see how it plays.
Didn't the strategic plan group talk about what they thought should be a range?
Yeah, but they picked their numbers out of their.
No, but they
hair.
did 25
So we'll
to
just
60, I
discard
think.
what they,
25 to 60.
Yeah.
25 to 60.
Right.
And
Which,
then they
you
said
know,
they
in
could go,
financial planning is kind of a scary range.
Well, yeah, I mean, 25 concerns me because I know it's the minimum that the state is requiring for their rating. But I've also understood that you need to have better than 25% just to maintain your cash flow in order to be able to pay your bills and all of that. Is that not accurate?
for Lake Bluff 65, we do not depend on early taxes in the spring to cover our end of the year expenses.
You got the cash flow.
So if Lake County decides to no longer issue early taxes, if we have a 25% fund balance, we're gonna be okay. It could be really close towards the end of the year, depending on how expenditures go. But
Okay.
since the bulk of ours are payroll and we pay that out evenly, we should be okay. 25% is in my opinion, is a real small amount fund reserve.
But there are some districts, Jane and you and I were talking about this, that have like 10%.
They have 10%?
policy. They work down, and then they go to referendum
Well,
and
Lake-
they say, we need to increase the
Lake
tax.
Bluff had $100,000 in 2001 before they had to go back. I mean, they got a little too low, but they never had more than $500,000.
I don't
Ever.
think that that's a good place to start our discussion.
Probably not,
I
but-
think it's a
but-
different, if it's a different world than that point, but I do think there needs to be a range. And just if you started with strategic planning just as a basis, 25 to 60%.
Well,
And
we've
then
already,
as a board, you have to come up with something.
and we've already said we want to bring a vote next time based on a bond issue that will bring it down to 60%. So that seems like that's got to be the top.
So 60, and to Rich's point, you want it to be at 40. I think that we should not get too hung up on this because actually a fund reserve percentage depend on economic circumstances a great deal. And so we may decide, this is economic Armageddon, and so we need to have, I'll be the first one to say we need to have 70%. But if things hum along, big caveat, if things hum along normally, then we may start at 60 and go down to 40 or whatever. So you can always change it. In the village, over the years, we have gone up and down based on economic circumstances.
And if you have a range, that's no problem. So it's-
As long as you don't go.
But you have a
below or above.
trigger,
Right.
an upper trigger and a lower trigger.
Right. And I think 25 to 60, I could live with that.
That's
Yeah.
fine, that's huge. That's more
Well,
than-
it is huge. In fact, I think it's too huge to be of a lot of
Effective.
utility. I share some concerns about 25% just because if the state of Illinois views that
That's
as
the
the
best
minimum-
rating, though. The 25% gets you the
Okay,
best
all right,
rating.
Okay. It does strike me
You can go
as-
below that and still get a
right.
3-star rating, right, Jane?
But we just
So you
had.
want to do
We
30
go
to
for
50?
5 stars.
Yeah, I agree. I
I
would
would
too.
go 30
Why
to
not?
How much
50.
money is 25%? It's like 4 million?
4 million.
No, it's more.
No, it's 4
Yeah,
million.
no, you're right.
16 is 4 million.
4 mil.
And we've got 9. We'll have 9.
But we just had a discussion where we did decide that 60% was about the right to shoot for with the defeasance, the
But that
defeasance.
leaves us some money to come down.
With the idea that we were going to spend some, because we know we have these capital expenditures, and then we wanted to prepare for the worst case scenario.
Right.
So I think we've sort of covered this
Right.
already
Right.
philosophically. Certainly 60 would be the very top, and we sort of want to shoot for below that based on what we see with capital expenditures.
30,
seems to me like a
50
40-ish.
To be it's something that we should look at every year, actually.
Yeah, What would happen if we said right now, you know what, 40 to 60, and we make some additional decisions about how we're budgeting, how we're gonna handle the levy, how we're gonna handle capital improvements at the middle school, and we look at it again in a year. And then in a year, maybe it's gonna
Because
make
it
more
matters
sense to bring it
levy, I
lower.
think. The other part of the
The-
decision is
The
levy.
reserve,
The levy, yes.
Yeah, the fund- well,
Because
we got
based
one
on
more.
how much you decide to have in reserve, then that modifies the levy. So,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
All these things are
Yeah, get it.
interactive.
So we could actually put in the policy, every year the policy has to be revisited by October 1st.
I mean, that's what a finance committee
Then you-
does.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. I think so.
25% is
$4
$4 million. I look at this educational assessment that we have here with not any price tags on it, but I think, boy, that media center could really use $4 million.
But that should be budgeted.
But-
Right.
We're-
My point is, are we gonna sit on $4 million and let it earn 0.9%? When there are many ways in which, there's ways in which that money ought to be working, I think.
And that's where I come back to like 30 to 50%, because I don't think you want all that money sitting around. And implicit in the earlier discussion was spending some of it for the capital and for the educational improvement. So that seems like the right. Now, I'd like to build a policy where we don't revisit that number every
Yeah.
year. I think the policy should have
Wait, you don't
safeguards
revisit,
built
but you
in.
analyze. You don't revisit, but you analyze,
Well-
and you say, okay, we're okay. Or you can take it down. Because sometimes you may have an inflow of revenue from new construction, and suddenly you're flush.
Well, naturally. Okay, go ahead.
finish your thought, and
I mean, you certainly can change it going forward. I don't want the policy to be that we're expected to change it or review
No.
it. I think we want to build something for the future, for future boards. I like the idea of having a report if we get outside the range, because I think that creates a historical and forces you to look at things. But I think what we're looking for in a policy is a range and some safeguards around, a philosophy, basically. That's what
I just was gonna comment, I was never a finance major, but my observation about 25% is in that range, then if one of these things does happen, or we end up where we've got, $1.5 million for whatever happens, it becomes very difficult to build it back up. Right now, we have excess cash coming in, so it's easy to say, 30%, 60%, whatever, because we're gonna have that cash coming in. For better or for worse, that's what's happening. But if we adjust ourselves so that we're levying really only for what we need, and we're budgeting with no contingencies, and then we have a reserve that is very small. My
27% or
subjective
something.
judgment about it. Well, let's say we've got 25%,
Well, but
and then you have some kind of $1
Big
million
hit.
event happen with
But-
pensions or whatever.
But what,
You don't have, just let me finish my sentence. You don't then have the ability to just say, okay, well, we're gonna increase our levy to account for that, to build it back up over a year or two. Because you can't, you're limited by the PTEL.
not
Well,
only that,
okay,
people
but
need the
this
25
is
potentially.
where it's
Right.
really
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, if we do some projection, and how long it would show us how long it would take to build back the levy. There's also another thing. One of the reasons you have reserve is to protect yourself against uncertainty in your revenue stream.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, where is the uncertainty? So you may get less money from the feds, but we get nothing.
Which is not.
And we get less money from the state of Illinois, and we get nothing. The other thing, 98% of what we're getting is real estate taxes. And it's not like this is an area that is overrun by foreclosure. So your revenue stream is not at risk. One of the reasons behind most reserve is to protect yourself against ebbs and flow of the revenue stream. So if you're the village and suddenly the auto market goes to the dogs or wherever it's supposed to go to, suddenly you're losing. We lost building permit fee. We lost like $1 million in revenue in building permit fee because of the crisis. So the reserve at the village is actually, we wanted to jack it up to 50%. You see what I'm saying? And at one point in time, it was. And it got us through the crisis. But we don't have this. We have those what-if scenarios. So that's the bottom line. The what-if scenario is the $1.5 million. And I think that included in this would be a build of CapEx, because I don't know exactly where it is right now in the budget.
And it's a fine balance between, remember, we're taking taxpayer dollars and putting it into account, earning no money, or leaving it in taxpayers' pockets. So it is a fine balance, I understand that. And if 25, I could go with the 30% bottom, that doesn't bother me. As long as we revisit it, or the board is required to revisit it to determine how those funds are being used. Because I still have yet to have anyone convince me that we need these funds far beyond 25%. But I'd like to see that. I've only been on board 6 months.
Doesn't the
$6.4 million is
25%,
40%.
doesn't the state standard of 25% for their highest rating also affect our bond rating?
It does.
I think that's the best
So-
reason, at least do 25.
But what I'm saying is if you're at 25, which is the floor for having the bond rating and the
I'm not sure
whatever,
about that, by the way.
then-
Bond rating is Moody's or Fitch. You know
That's
what
the
I'm
opinion of William Blair.
saying? Okay.
Yeah, they put that in an email
You're
to us.
saying
It's
if
the
we have a
floor.
catastrophic event.
So
and we're
let's not
already at
argue, let's not
floor
argue
for
over
the bond
5%,
And it's
make
hard
it
to
30, I don't
recover
care.
from it if
Well,
we're
give
budgeting
Gene something to
tight
work with
and
for now.
levying tight.
Draft it at 30 to 50 or 30
I would
to
say 30 to,
55.
I would say, I could live with 30 to 50.
Why don't we go 25% plus the disaster number? What was that?
That's probably roughly 30 then.
So
That's
what can we come to
like-
consensus on?
I would-
'Cause
I would
you're
re-
all
It sounds
pretty
like,
much-
here's
you're very
consensus, we want a
close.
range.
I would
I
recommend,
came
We
up
want a
with that.
range,
Mark,
and we
thank you.
want when the range is passed in one direction or the other, it triggers an action on the part of the board.
And a trigger, I've got that.
I would say 30,
30% would be the bottom, because 30% is gonna give you,
5 million.
A ton of money.
and that's gonna give you an extra $800,000.
Costs a ton of money to run the school district too.
Okay, that's 30% on the
version
bottom, and
budget.
I could live with 50% on the top.
Yeah, let's go with that for now and start drafting.
Great.
I agree.
Okay.
And recognizing that it's late, we can move forward.
Yep, I'll get
Get
started.
that to us in the morning?
Yeah.
Yes, John, I will.
And then the last
What are you
thing,
doing tomorrow morning?
the last thing on our discussion budget is to
Tutoring.
begin, did I say discussion budget? The last thing on our discussion agenda is to, item F, which is to begin our levy discussion. And,
We've done that.
well, we've been into the lot, I thought we were
There's
gonna.
gonna be a levy. We're just
Start.
setting the
I would
stage
use
for
this.
October
There's some
22nd.
more items I think that
I
Jean
mean,
wanted
we
to
need a
cover.
lot of information for this.
October 20, we're setting the stage, so I'm turning this over to Jane.
Stage is set. Stage is set. Yeah, October 22nd, we'll present some projections. I'll have PMA present projections, cash flow, and scenarios on various levy rationale. We'll give you several
And
scenarios.
budget projections,
Yes,
like 5 years?
yes.
Okay.
I always give 5-year projections. I've always historically given 5 years, and that's what PMA will be giving as well. So we'll give you that information. You can say, see, we do this with the levy, here's what projections look like. If we do this with the levy, here's what projections look like. So you can go into it with some good information, make a good decision on this next levy. And I'm gonna explain to you how what you levy, how it's gonna affect all your future levies, which will affect all
Yeah.
your future budgets. And don't forget, you'll be
Can we
negotiating
have
this next year.
that in writing, but very, one of the frustration I have is that when I look at financial information, it's very piecemeal. So I have to put it together and I go back and forth and, so is it, can we show the rules, the projection, the drawback with each scenario, the pluses with each scenario, and so on and so forth?
So you mean a written summary before we go into the meeting?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you want the scenarios, and then you want,
In other words, let's say we decide, this is hypothetical, we decide, okay, we're gonna need X amount of money for next year, but we have this in reserve, so we should levy this. And then what are the consequences of this?
That's what we're gonna do.
All right.
It's gonna be at cash flow, so we're gonna show you if you levy this, here's what your revenue projections are, here's what your expenditure projections are, based on this budget and assumptions we make going forward, here's what's happening to your cash flow, your fund reserves. So it's gonna
And we'll
increase,
get,
decrease, or
The
whatever.
reserve is what matters, let's not say cash flow, reserve, right?
and we will get as we do for every meeting, these things the Thursday before to
Absolutely.
review.
Yes, I'm meeting,
And
I'm
a
meeting with,
narrative as well, so.
we're meeting Thursday
And if it's
to
an
go through
Excel
this.
document, is there some way you can send us the Excel?
They won't give it to me in Excel document.
Why not?
Who's they?
PMA,
Ask them.
they won't because they've got all their formulas
It's
and then it's like
proprietary.
a trade secret or
It's
something.
proprietary document.
yeah.
They don't want you to be able to do anything
So
that
they
you could
don't
pay them
want
for.
me to manipulate the Excel.
Well, I can,
Oh,
I'll,
that's okay, I can download.
I'll help you figure out how to
and I
do
can
that.
put it into an Excel file.
I could,
That is problematic.
So we have down,
I'll give you
Scenarios.
my documents in Excel,
Okay.
which
Good.
typically do.
all right, so the 22nd, we're doing levy, fund balance policy. I'm gonna just bring some last minute questions.
in bond decision.
Bond decision you're voting on. We are not having principal reports at that meeting because all the principals and everybody will be at the meeting next Tuesday for strategic planning.
Any food?
Next week, if you want food, John, we'll have food there. Promise.
No, we
We
have
don't
to
need food.
watch what we're spending our money.
No, I was gonna actually bake myself, then no
It's
one
all
will ever ask me to bring food
potluck
again.
here. It's potluck policy.
So, and then we do have closed session October 22nd for my check-in evaluation on how I'm doing on my goals. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
Have we covered item F as much as you want to cover it tonight?
Yep,
Okay.
this was the hook. That's what they call it in writing.
Does anybody else have any issues they want to raise before we adjourn? Before we go to public comment?
No, we wanna adjourn.
I move we
Yeah.
adjourn.
Does-
There being no one
Second.
Is
here
there
for
anybody,
no public.
Nate,
There's
would you
no
like to make
public.
public comment and address the board?
Mark, you're an engineer, there's no public.
I'm
Facts.
doing it for the camera, May I
But
have,
they're not gonna talk
a,
to
may
you.
I have a motion to adjourn at
So moved.
9:17 p.m.?
Second.
So we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Who was the first?
Aye.
Opposed?
Who was the second?
Julie.
Julie was second, we was first. Thank you.
You guys may
And
want to
good
tell
night.
Julie to have a nice trip.
Julie,